Hi folks, welcome to Perf Mentor. In this video session, we are going to see what is parameterization and what is correlation. When it comes to performance testing, right, parameterization and correlation are like key concepts using which we build our performance testing scripts. So these are very important. If we try to build a script ignoring this parameterization and correlation, right, the script is literally useless. So it's very important as a performance tester, you should thoroughly understand the concepts of parameterization and correlation before you start building your scripts. Okay, so now let's try to understand in simple terminologies. Parameterization. What is parameterization? Parameterization is nothing but the data that is sent by the user to the server. So that needs to be parameterized. We'll see that with a real-time example, but let's try to understand in a simple way. So it's nothing but the data that's sent from the browser to the server needs to be parameterized. On the other hand, correlation is nothing but the data that is sent from the server to the client, right? That needs to be correlated. Just try to understand the simple thing. Data sent from the browser to the server needs to be parameterized, and the data that is sent from the server to the client needs to be correlated. Okay, now let's try to see that with a real-time example. So this is a very simple demo application. So I told you, right, what is parameterization? The data that is sent from the browser to the server needs to be parameterized. So in this case, when I do the sign in, right, the user needs to input the username and password. So this is a data that is sent from the browser to the server. So this is a candidate for parameterization. Okay, so let's see another example. So I am trying to search for a product. Okay, every time maybe or every different user search for a unique or a different product. So again, that data that we sent in the search box needs to be parameterized. And again, in the sign in also, while building the scripts, we would have built with a single user, but if you want to test it with 500 different users, so we need to parameterize it. So you need to think, what are the data that not always constant or fixed, or we cannot hard code it, because if we try to hard code this data, right, every single user will be trying to log in with the same user. And again, if we try to search for a same product, right, every time it hits the same particular product. So try to understand, in real world scenario, how the user will be using this application. Accordingly, we have to select the candidates for parameterization. Okay, now let's see what is correlation. So for that, now we have to see the response, because response comes from the server to the browser. Okay, let's see this example. Again, I'm trying to log in. So when I log in, so let's see there is any dynamic value that is sent by the server to the browser. Okay, so let's see it in the header. So if you see here, right, the session ID. So let's try to copy this and see how this is different in each scenario. So if you see here, right, I copy the session ID that was sent by the server to the client or the browser. So now I'm going to try to do a different action. Maybe I'm going to click this birds. So again, if I see here, right, so I could see the session ID got generated. This is an example. So this is the session ID that we got from this particular page. Okay, so even if I select a product, that will give me a unique session ID. So if you look at this J session ID in all these cases, you would have noticed it's the same, right? From the beginning, you could see that in all the requests, this seems to be the same value. So let's see what happens when I try to sign in again. When I try to sign in again, right, let's see the session ID that got generated now. Okay, so if you see here, right, so this is an entirely different value that got generated, or that was sent by the server to the client. So these kind of values that change dynamically every iteration, or if you try to log out and log in again, this might change, or based on the different types of users you use, it might change, or based on the data you use, the server might send a different dynamic value. So it's important that you understand that these values are dynamic, and these values are required to establish the handshake between the browser and the server. So only those kind of values needs to be correlated. And what are the impact of doing correlation means the server will not accept that response. If you send a hard-coded value instead of using correlation technique, right, server will not allow that communication to happen, or the handshake will not happen between the application and the server. So it's very important that we handle these kind of dynamic values using a technique called correlation. So now let's try to see how we will use this in a script. So I'm going to open my JMeter application. Okay, I'm going to use already recorded script. So I did the login, right? I want to parameterize the login, and instead of sending the same data, that is J2EE, I want to use a 500 different combinations of username and password. So for that, first let's try to create a CSV data config. I'm going to handle this with the CSV data files. I'll be creating a CSV data config. I have already created it, so you can create again. So what you have to do is you have to create it, and you have to add whatever the number of users and password you want to use. You can add that in this CSV file, and you have to give a header name. So this will be the reference variable name. So username, I'm giving it as p_username, and p is nothing but all the parameterized value. I use p. I use a prefix called p, and for all the values that needs to be correlated, I use a prefix called c_. So I'm using p_username and p_password as the variable name here. So now I'm going to reference this in my script. So I'll save this one, and I'll be saving this in a particular file location. What I'll be doing here is I'll browse and map that data, right? So map the data file. So now I'm going to use this data. Then what I'll be doing is the variable name, the p_user caps u username, comma p_password. You can have any number of variables defined here: username, password. I can even give p_search string. Whatever the data you want to parameterize, you can have it in a one file or even different files. You can manage it the way you want it. Here in this case, I'm using only two variable names, so I'm defining it here. And ignore the first line. Make sure you check this properly, otherwise it will start reading from the first row. So let's keep this as true. Okay, so these are the things that you need to do first. Okay, so I've already done on this file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. Okay, so yeah, so now I have parameterized these two values, username and password. Here what I will do is, the way we have to reference that variable name is by this format: dollar within braces you give p_username. Whatever the variable name you define for username, just give that name. And similarly for a password, I'll be using dollar braces p_password here. Okay, that's it. So these values are parameterized, and if you think this username is being used in other requests as well, wherever this username comes, you need to replace that with p_username, a dollar braces p_username. Similarly, password, wherever if there are other requests that uses the same password, right, even there you need to change that with a dollar p_password. Okay, so now let's try to run this and check. Okay, so I have used it in login. So let's see what is sent in the request. So if you see J2E, I use that variable name, right, that has successfully substituted with the values that was in the parameter file. Similarly, the password, username and password have been successfully substituted with the values that we gave in the Excel file. So this is nothing but correlation. Okay, so there are different ways of handling correlation. Maybe we'll discuss about later video, but just now try to understand how this concept works. Okay, so now let's see how to do correlation, right? So if you see this request, right, login, so there's a value called fp that changes dynamically every time I record the script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle this value using correlation technique. How to do that? This login, this particular thing is changing dynamically. So I'll be trying to check for this dynamic value in the previous request. Usually if you see any dynamic values in any of the requests, right, that dynamic value should be coming in the response of the previous request. Okay, so it should be coming in the previous request, which we will capture and we will use in the subsequent request. We notice this particular dynamic value is changing every time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see what are the requests that I have before this. So please remember this, you cannot do the correlation technique after in the subsequent request. You have to do the request. You have to first identify the first instance of when this dynamic value got generated. So in our case, it got generated in the second step. So I have to find this in the response of my first request, or if there are 3 or 4 requests, you have to check in the response of all those 4 requests. So in our case, we have only one. So I'm going to check in the response of that particular first request. So this is the response I got for that first request. Let's search with FP, or you can also search with the string. So you can see that particular string is coming in the response of this first home page request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture this with the left boundary and the right boundary. Okay, so just remember this left boundary and right boundary has to be unique. So I just capture that with the boundary values. So I'm going to add a regular expression extractor. So if you go to this add post processor, right, you'll see something like regular expression extractor. So this is the function using which we will capture this dynamic value from the response and use it in the subsequent request. So name of the created variable, let's see underscore FP, or whatever the name you want to use it, but make sure like you use some name that is easy to identify. So here I'll be saying from where I need to fetch that value. Is it in the response body, or is it in the response header, or request header? Wherever you want to extract that value, you have to mention it here. Most 90% of the cases, 95% of the cases, you'll be seeing the dynamic value in the body. In few cases, you'll see it in the response headers. So select the that option that suits your requirement, then give the name, then the regular expression extractor. So whatever I captured in the response, right, I'm going to give that entire string value. This is the value that keeps dynamically changing. So I want to replace that with the regular expression extractor dot star question mark. That's it. And this left boundary and the right boundary remains constant. Okay, then add a couple of things we need to add. $1 from the first group I want to extract, and I want to extract the first occurrence. So I'll give 1. If you give 0 means if there are multiple values that uses this left boundary and right boundary, right, you can use 0. In our case, we are going to extract the first occurrence, so I'm giving it as 1. So default value what I'm going to give is no value. Okay, what it will do, right, this extractor, it will try to capture the value that comes between this left boundary and the right boundary. So whatever value comes between this boundary value, this will be captured and assigned to this variable c underscore fp. So once this is successfully assigned, we can use this c underscore fp in subsequent request wherever the dynamic value comes. And if in case if this first request is wrong, or it didn't get a proper response, it will not be able to capture this dynamic value from this response. In that case, what it will send is this no value gets assigned to the c underscore fp, and wherever we are replacing this variable, right, instead of that dynamic value, we'll be seeing this no underscore value, and our script will fail. Okay, so now I have already created this, so I'm going to remove the one which I just created now. So in this case, if you see c underscore fp, and I know this dynamic value comes in this request, so I'm going to replace this with $CP. So if I do this, it will capture the dynamic value from the response of this first request and assign it to that particular variable. And in this request, instead of whatever the hard-coded value we had, it will be the dynamic value that got generated at the runtime, that will be replaced here and our script will work fine. If you don't do that, what happens is your script will fail because you're passing a hard-coded value which got generated at the time of recording. So that's the simple concept behind this, and that's how we do correlation. I think now you're very clear with the concept of parameterization and correlation, and why do we use it and how do we use it, and we also saw some real-time example on identifying those candidates. So hope this video was very useful. If you want to see some related videos on performance testing and engineering, please do like and subscribe our channel, and have a happy learning. Thank you.